All right, welcome everyone. Happy Tuesday. Thank you for joining us for this 13th of the month discussion about underreported current events. We're going to go ahead and go into our welcoming. Okay, so a little bit of housekeeping. We just want to encourage you all to be a part of the discussion. If you would like to ask questions towards the end of our event, please be sure to jot those questions down so you don't forget them. Also, during the discussion, if you would like to pop into the chat, please feel free to do that. We ask that you keep yourselves on mute during the discussion, and putting your video on is encouraged but not required. A little bit about BRJA. So we were officially founded in 2003, and it has its roots in the Agents of Change workshop that began in 1996. And BRJA is a program of Fusion Partnerships, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Here at BRJA, we provide free, open to the public resources such as these 13th of the month events and our short take videos, which you can watch on Instagram. You can also visit our YouTube channel and our Instagram page for these regular offerings. We provide anti-racism, anti-oppression, organizational development consulting, executive coaching, assessment, and workshops to organizations both local and national. If you would like more information about that, please visit our website at bemoreantiracist.org for more information. Also, we would love it if you would take a few minutes to follow us on social media. As I said already, we have a YouTube page where we put the 13th of the month events back up. You can watch some from the past. You can share with others if they missed tonight's event. We also post our short takes on our YouTube channel. You can follow us on Facebook for updates about different offerings and workshops that we offer, including our 13th of the month events. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. We are a small nonprofit, and we appreciate all donations. If you would like to donate, you can use this QR code, or you can go to PayPal and use bemoreantiracist.org/donate. And we appreciate all donations. We take one-time donations, as well as if you would like to become a monthly sustainer. Our slide is not working for our workshop that's coming up, but Anthony, did you want to talk a little bit about the workshop that's coming up?
Yes, so we have a webinar series that we've been doing, Conversations with Baltimore Racial Justice Action. And so the one that we have coming up is on critical race theory. What is critical race theory and what does that mean in the workplace is what we'll be diving into. And so, yeah, you can sign up. You can go to our social medias, to our Facebook to find out more about it, or you can go to our LinkedIn to learn more about these. The first one is on Thursday, September the 29th at 12:30. And the second one is on October the 4th, a Tuesday at 10 a.m. And they're deeply discounted at $20 to celebrate 20 years of us doing racial justice work. So hope to see you all there.
Thank you, Anthony. And also, I just want to plug our 13th of the month event for next month. For October, we'll be talking about how disabilities intersect with being Black here in America. So be sure to join us for that conversation. So tonight, we were going to be talking about underreported current events, part 2, since we did have this event a few months ago and it was such a great success, we decided to do it again. We're not going to be so much talking about things that are underreported, so much as talking about the lens through which these current events are being reported. We're going to talk about the water crisis that's happening in Jackson, Mississippi, as well as here in Baltimore. We're also going to be talking about the recent death of Queen Elizabeth and how it's been dominating our news cycles. And we're also going to be talking about loan forgiveness. And so as we're talking, we may be also talking about a few other topics. But as we're talking about these topics, I want you all to be thinking about how these topics intersect, because at first glance, they might seem completely non-related, but I would like us to be thinking about how they are related and in what ways. And we, talk here at BRJ about how racism happens on different levels, right? On an individual level, as well as on a cultural level, on a institutional level, as well as a structural level. And so just kind of keeping that in mind as we have this conversation about how racism is involved with these topics and how they're interrelated. So tonight I have my esteemed colleagues, Tammy, Adar, and Ebony joining me for this conversation. And I've really enjoyed preparing for this conversation with them. So I hope you all enjoy the discourse. Again, just want to remind you all to feel free to pop any thoughts that you might have, questions, points of discussion in the chat. And then we will hold maybe about 15-20 minutes, depending on time, at the end for audience discussion. So I feel like we may start here with Queen Elizabeth and her passing a few days ago and how it's kind of been dominating our news cycle. Would anyone like to start us off with thoughts? And why is it dominating our news cycle? Go ahead, Adar.
Oh, I was bumping it over to Ebony. So let me share this. The way in which the coverage has been happening, right, has been a source of concern. It has felt more like propaganda. That media is talking about not her role as a monarch, not her role in continuing with the colonies, not her role in any of that. And there are atrocities that have in fact taken place under her 70-year reign. There is none of that. And anytime when that is brought up in the media, there's always someone to say, but wait a minute, she's a wife, she's a mother, she's a grandmother, she's a great grandmother, as if that is what this whole thing is about. And that is what people should concentrate on, not the ceremonial role that she has occupied for 70 years. She has availed herself of all of the spoils of that position, but it is somehow beyond the pale to critique her in that role that she assumed and did not relinquish or speak out against any atrocities of. And I agree with Jan. Why do Americans care so much about the Queen? And that is the other part of that story. When it dominates the news cycle 24/7, as it has been, then we're hearing less about, the water crisis in Baltimore, about the water crisis in Jacksonville. We're hearing less about the fact that, that though 40%, if we're talking about the water crisis across the country, 40% of that happens in communities of color, and it takes longer for those communities to come back into compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. So all of those things are bumped off the page, right? We're not talking about police shooting innocent Black people anymore. We're only talking about this woman and not even talking about her in a way that that encompasses her reign and the negative, as well as maybe positive for Britain, emotionally positive, but the negative impacts in terms of resources, in terms of who reparations were paid to, etc. We're not talking about those aspects of her reign. So that is why that coverage is of such concern to me.
Thank you, Adar.
Yeah, and I think the other part of it for me is thinking about the hyper focus on the fact that she died and like the romanticizing of the role in the monarch, and not talking about the implications of what is to come now to the Commonwealth, to like, there's a way, like, I think that it matters in America to talk about, in the United States to talk about it, because a lot of the countries close to us, there are countries close to us that are still commonwealths of the British monarch, and still have her face on their money. And so a conversation that isn't being talked about much is the burden to these countries to change their currency to reflect the change in the monarch. And if that should be done, I think we're in a really cool place in history where we're in the modern world. The conversation of the relevance of the monarch is not a new conversation. And so just going along with the changing into, all right, it's going to be Charles, and then you're going to have to put his face on stuff. And it's like, okay, this is a great time to pause and figure out, like, do we actually need to do that? And particularly my family's from the Caribbean. So thinking about the countries in the Caribbean, there's this struggle to have complete independence and not have the British as the head of state, like the monarch as the head of state, and having their images on money for the countries that still have to do that. And so with this changing, with her passing, I think it's a really great opportunity to have conversations about what that means politically. And I'm disappointed in how little is being talked about with regard to that. So yeah, and it's real life impacts on primarily brown countries.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, Tammy, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, I was gonna make a couple notes building on Adar and Ebony. One of the first things Adar said got me thinking about white women always getting a pass. We always reframe white women and their behavior that's violent, that's traumatic, that is oppressive, and spin it. White women always get a pass, essentially, right? With whatever behaviors they exhibit, we always reframe to protect the white woman, even when history shows us that the protection is not warranted. And in fact, it's the exact opposite of what's happened. I've been thinking a bit about the funding of the monarchy and just reading articles about how much money goes through the members of the family and the sort of affiliates of the family. I mean, millions, billions of dollars, that I think there are grumblings about how much money is given to them, but not in any way where it's removed from them, right? And when you think about wealth extraction and the extraction that's happened over generations when Britain was a colonial power, and as it continues to have this influence in places and extract resources, just thinking about like where that money could go instead, and what that narrative could be, and what the reality of shifting that narrative would look like, right? Like how likely it would be to switch that funding to reparations, or making things right, or returning items that were stolen, by the colonial power during their time in various places. Also thinking a bit, and I want to personally read more on this. It's almost like it's like this perfect example of silence is violence. It's this like the queen is the figurehead around the world. We Americans, like, we're so infused with this fantasy of who she is and what she represents. And so like the government acts in her name, like she is the figurehead, but then she doesn't actually, she's not supposed to be political. And so she sort of is removed. So then she's not responsible for decision making. And yet decisions are made in her name. So it's a way of just sort of everyone gets to wash their hands of everything they've done, because it's actually no one's fault specifically, right? Everyone can always point to someone else with all of these questions through history and currently.
Mm-hmm. So I want to just like put things in a context, because this just so totally builds on your point, Tammy. So when she ascended to queendom, and I think it was like 1952, 1951, something like that, right?
53.
At the time that she assumed role as queen, more than 25% of the world's population was under British imperialism. Okay, so that's more than like 700 million people.
Joshua.
And even though during her reign, 20 of the former colonies came to independence, fought for their independence, demanded their independence. The way that it's being spun now is that she is all of a sudden this heroine of decolonization, you know, of those 20 countries. No, those 20 countries fought for their independence. And we're not even talking about all of the scars that were left from, you know, colonization. We're not talking about that lack of reparations or even an apology. When India demanded an apology, and there were so many atrocities that took place in India, especially before she came to the throne. But again, you are wearing and sucking up all of the benefits. So there is an accountability there, not for you as a person, but for you as the figurehead and face of colonialism. As Tammy says, things have been done in your name, and you are the figurehead of Britain, right? So when India went and said, you know what, we want an apology, we want an acknowledgement, we want something. Do you know what she said? She said, hey, can't rewrite history. Past is the past. So what you're saying, Tammy, about, you know, there never being any kind of accountability and countries being able to whitewash their hands from it, because bringing it up at any time is being seen as an attack on the individual, not as a call for accountability for that individual who assumed that position as figurehead. There are jewels, wealth that have been stolen from different countries in Africa, from India, one of the, I think, the biggest diamonds in the world. They're not trying to give that back. In fact, they have reframed those things as being gifts. And so like I was sharing, you know, with my colleagues earlier, it's like me just bogarting my way into your house, bashing you over the head, stealing your house. And then when there's a call for accountability, I'm saying, oh, no, they gave it to me. They wanted me to have it. And then if people say, but what about the scars on their head? Oh, please, you can't rewrite history. The past is the past. And that is the way that media is spinning it. And they're also shutting down people who are insisting upon accountability. There's a Nigerian professor at Carnegie Mellon, and she tweeted that she hoped that Elizabeth would die an excruciating death. And she explained that she feels that way because of the British government backing the Nigerian government during the genocide of Biafran. And nobody knows that history anymore because nobody is teaching it. It's like that too is whitewashed. And that was a genocide in which like 500,000 people were starved or murdered. That happened under Elizabeth's reign. It was in the 1960s. But I bet you that nobody has heard media mention anything about that. And that is the problem with the framing, not just of Queen Elizabeth's death. That's a great example of it, but the framing of our own history. And there is a through line there when it comes to issues of racism and white supremacy, that media is complicit in sweeping all of that under the rug.
Very true. Thank you, Adar. Can we talk a little bit about, kind of going back to Jan's comment, why do you all think there is such a importance in such a heavy tone of making sure Americans are buying in? What are you all's thoughts on that? Why do they need buy-in from Americans about a British monarchy?
Who's buying in though? What Americans are buying in? That's my question.
Right.
And I'm not saying that there are not Black and other non-Black people of color who aren't firmly on the Queen Elizabeth train. Not saying that, but I'm saying who is making these media decisions and forcing it down people's throat.
Right.
And it's in the way, like, it's so biased. It's clear that it's so clearly propaganda to promote this particular narrative. And I think a lot of times I see this in work, I see this just in all aspects of retelling or doing a job. People want to do things the way that like to make it look pretty, to make it like put a pretty bow on it. This idea that we can't wrestle with the truth and like how something is and like how it actually has been functioning and impacting people in the way that I think in one breath, news claims to be an unbiased place where the facts are the facts and you're reporting on this thing. But it's very clear, especially now, I think the era of Trump like really blew it wide open of how biased media can be on and polarizing. But the fact that this just complete inability to educate the masses on the impact of colonial rule, and it is this is like my deepest disappointment in just news in general, to take this to be a more personal issue where it is Queen Lizzie, the grandma, has passed. And like, I'm sorry, losing a grandma is hard. But nobody, as Adar said, nobody would care about her if she was just some English grandma who drank tea and had those little corgis and like did stuff that she did. That's not why we know her. And I think that it's just such a missed opportunity for mass media to report and like set history straight and like tell things honestly. But I will say, in an optimistic lens, I have been thoroughly enjoying TikTok, Al Jazeera, the independent news sources, and how they are telling the legacy of Queen Elizabeth is really, it gives me hope about what it looks like to have true media coverage that is affirming to people beyond just white people, that is affirming to the people who have been historically marginalized and oppressed by these superpowers. So I think this is just a further reminder that like mainstream media is not for people that look like me and people who have histories like mine, and that these independent news outlets are really the things to pump money and resources into and to spend time observing. And like these content creators, this is real journalism. I think that this gets into this thing of there's the gatekeeping with what is real information and what is not real information. But then when these credited sources are so biased and whitewashing history, it makes it very clear that we are in a new age where CNN, Washington Post, they might not be the credible source on issues, particularly when it comes to human experience and race and identity. And I think that's really important as we get into a world that wants to be more affirming, that all of us in our roles be mindful that vetted sources is not the vetted sources of 20 years ago. Like we do need to broaden as a society what we take as credible information, because a lot of our mainstream news is perpetuating things that are made, decisions that are made by a very small group of people that perpetuate some heartfelt desire to live in this world where white people and white history loved everyone and was generous. And this whole system that we're in was created in good faith. So yeah, so I don't know what I just said, but I like independent news sources and I really like social media, and social media gets a hard critical eye from the like who's who of reporting. But the most information about where the different, I learned this week about where all the crown jewels came from. And I learned so much from TikTok and from Instagram videos. So I want to make a plug to be mindful of what you are looking to give you information.
Mm-hmm. So can I like say one thing about news that Ebony brought up? And I first of all, I agree with you about the independent news sources. And I think that Jan wants to know what independent news sources that you read. I'm checking it with the chat, keeping up with the chat as we're talking. But what you said, Ebony, about like news, and that news isn't what it was 20 years ago. And I think that we sleep on the fact that our mainstream news now is not news. It is entertainment.
Yeah.
They're going for ratings, you know, they're going for eyeballs. And so instead of reporting, they are, you know, sensationalizing. They are framing in the way that will draw eyeballs. They're not necessarily framing in the way that gives out information. And any contextualization that there was 20 years ago, limited though it was, that is lost now. The other thing is, as you pointed out, Ebony, that news, quote unquote, now are corporate sources. And so it is revenue driven. So what we call news is really entertainment. You know, it is there as a money-making machine. The product is to get people to believe that it is news and that they are actually getting information. But the goal is to make money.
Mhm.
And we sleep on the difference at our own peril.
Thank you, Adar. I want to say I think the goal is to make money, and I think the goal is also to propagate and to hold up white supremacy, right?
Agree.
We all, you know, have kind of been
Yep.
talking about that, but those to me are the two goals. Like,
I agree.
keep our society on one note. Tammy, did you have anything else?
Yeah, I wanted to add to that and just say, I think because of our cultural connectedness to Britain, that we, you know, that was our colonial power way back, you know, and the ideology, the politics that we have here, it's almost like extra important for us to buy the narrative that they're selling because of the closeness and the history. Because like if you look abroad and you think, you know, which countries are we the closest to, we're always backing up Britain, they're backing us up, right? Like in wars and wherever we go, whatever we interfere with. So there's that extra layer of, particularly with this monarch in this country, the importance of selling that narrative to support capitalism, white supremacy, but also just that extra connection that exists between us and them.
Mm-hmm. Well, it definitely continues the narrative that the United States is a white country.
Yeah, for sure. But I think, to me, I also feel like, obviously this is not being explicitly said, right? But I think there's this push to support a colonialist power because we are also colonialists, right? Like, let's be okay with everything they've done because we're doing it too, right? Like, it may not be on as big a scale as England because they got a jump start on us, but to me that feels like part of the narrative as well.
Yeah, I was thinking back to South Africa and apartheid and what it took for us as a country to push back on what was happening there, and like what had to shift here in order for us to shift our narrative about that not being okay, and how long that took.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And while America was jumping on the bandwagon late about disinvestment in South Africa, they still were supporting laws and customs that kept Black people in this country, right? In, you know, under the system of white supremacy. So they were propping up a system of white supremacy here that they were publicly saying that they were not supporting in South Africa, although they were.
Very true. So I kind of want to come back to what Adar was saying about how, because our media coverage has been flooded with so much about Queen Elizabeth that we haven't been able to talk about things like what's happening in Jackson, Mississippi, what's happening in West Baltimore, you know, in our own backyard here in West Baltimore, and that is the water crises. And I think it was last month we talked about environmental racism, either last month or the month before. Sorry, time is all blurred together for me. And we talked about environmental racism, and we talked about how as climate change is happening, it's Black and brown people who are going to bear the brunt of these things that are happening in our society, and we're seeing it right now. So I kind of want to turn our attention now to talking a little bit more about what's happening in Jackson, what's happening in Baltimore, and the water crisis. Anyone want to jump us off?
I was in an area that where there was a water advisory
Mm.
the boiling water. And when I tell you that, and you too, Michelle, were you even more conscious of the amount of water that you use on a day-to-day? Because I know I was, because boiling water, man, it got old real fast, you know,
Yes.
for everything. And once again, it was brought home, you know, when you still think about Flint, Michigan, and the fact that people still cannot have confidence in their drinking water. And again, I will say that all of these infrastructure failures are happening in communities that are majority communities of color. This didn't just happen. This is as a result of decades and generations of disinvestment in those communities. So, you know, this is an outcome of racism and white supremacy in policy and in financial investment in communities of color. This is just yet another way that we are reaping the results of that, even in Baltimore. And I didn't see anything on the national news about the water crisis that happened in West Baltimore.
Nope.
Yeah, even the way that they are here locally in Baltimore talking about the water, there's still no answer about how it happened and what caused it, which is the biggest issue, I think. Like, of course, yeah, we want clean water and we're happy that the water is clean. But if you don't figure out why that happened, and like, how do we prevent it if we don't figure it out? And I feel like already it's kind of like oh, it's over. And it's like, it's not over until we figure out why it happened. And that, I think, to other parts of Maryland that are predominantly white and higher income, and it would not be over. It would be what happened, like even the marketing, the coverage around, okay, it's safe, you don't have to, you can still pick up water here, and there's no caveat about, and this is where you can go to get updates on the investigation as to what caused the contamination in the water. No follow-up around that. It's just like, the water's clean now, continue on. And it's like, it's troubling how people are being communicated with about this issue. And I do believe that it is because of the population that was impacted and their race and their income level, the assumed income level of the population. So yeah, I think that it's really terrible how it's being handled, and the communication around it is not good. Just having clean water isn't enough. People do need to understand how that happened and what is being done to make sure that it does not happen again.
Thank you, Ebony. Tammy, did you have anything to add?
No, I was just thinking that somebody probably, I have a broad overview of what's happened. So I think are there folks maybe here that need a little bit more info on what's happening in Mississippi and what's happened here? I know that I got emails because my kids go to Baltimore City Public Schools. I don't know that I would have heard about it otherwise, because I try to not engage with media oftentimes if it's going to sort of get me in a dark rabbit hole somewhere. But sort of failures in Mississippi, it was a flood that caused a failure of a cleaning or a processing, water processing, that like their main structure that processes water, that cleans it for the folks that live there. And it impacted mostly folks of color in Jackson. And then in Baltimore, there was an E. coli. E. coli was found in the water. And I think they still, like, they don't know why it happened or why it's gone. They think it might have been construction in the area, is what I read. So just maybe someone else can jump in and answer more if I've not done it justice.
I just kind of wanted to add, Tammy, thank you for that, Tammy. I do want to add about Jackson that once again on social media, I read that that the issue there has been an ongoing thing, because back in the 1960s, when they were going to integrate schools, most of the white people who lived in Jackson decided to leave. So they had a huge white flight about integration of schools. And ever since then, there's been, just not having the resources to take care for the upkeep of the pipes. And that this is not the first time that apparently that this has happened in Jackson. It's just that the issue was bigger this time, but it's kind of been something that's been ongoing. So just wanted to kind of put that into that context.
Yeah, this week actually I met somebody who is from near Jackson, and she mentioned that it's getting national coverage, but most of her lifetime, she's in her 20s, most of her lifetime, the running conversation has been, do not drink the water. There is no water in Jackson. Like she's like, it's just getting up here now, but that's been how it has always been. And it's only now a travesty because it's gotten national media coverage.
Right.
And thank you all for that, you know, and I think, again, none of this happens like just like that at the snap of the fingers. Jackson failed the EPA water standard test way back in 2020.
Wow.
And nothing was done. And they kept putting it off and putting resources elsewhere. And that is why we're here now. And it's important for us to like say that and own that, because this is a policy and failure. This is the failure of people in government deciding that they were going to take care of their 150,000 residents in Jackson who do not have, it's been like what, 6 weeks, this happened in July, without clean water. There's still muddy water, right? And we know that if this happened in some white upper middle class community in near, you know, in Mississippi, that there would be a lot more going on to help those residents, including mental health counseling, including a whole bunch of people down there trying to see whether people are being physically or otherwise impacted by the lack of drinking water. Flint, 7 years since the water crisis first started. They're still dealing with this, right? And in Baltimore, even though, I mean, for now, things seem to have been cleared up, what is not cleared up is whatever infrastructure problems that there are.
Right.
And I cannot believe that if this had happened in Roland Park, that we would still be, you know, in the same place with it that we are. Woo, it's over. We've had 2 tests and it tested clean. So yay, we're back.
Right.
We would be doing a lot more exploration of what happened. And maybe they're doing that behind the scenes. But the thing is that you're still not communicating with the public who do not have confidence in that. You know, the Black people in the United States are the people who have no, that's not true. Latinx people have the least amount of confidence in the ability to obtain and to have clean water. Black people are next. White people, all the confidence in the world. And that racialization says something about our policy choices and who we keep safe and who we don't.
I wanted to tie that, what Adara was saying, back to our Queen Elizabeth conversation about, I feel like sometimes we get in this idea, well, that's the past, right? Like that was before, this is what we have now, but we continue to make those decisions, those policy, those financial decisions with city governments, state governments about not funding, or what gets funded, what doesn't, which neighborhoods get funded, what infrastructure gets funded, what doesn't. So it's like history is ongoing. And I think it's really easy for governments, if people are not paying attention, to sort of say, well, that was before, we've inherited that, we're doing what we can, rather than really confronting these major issues and prioritizing them and funding them and getting them resolved.
You know, very true, Tammy, because right now we have a governor who has literally done everything he can to fund literally every other county in Maryland except for Baltimore. I think Baltimore may be PG County. I think PG County doesn't get funded either. But that is our current governor. This is not a...
Remember when the city of Baltimore was completely erased from the map?
From the map, right. And that's how he sees it. Baltimore does not exist to him unless he needs to send in the National Guard, but otherwise, no. Anyone
So
else
what
have-
does that say then? I mean, you know, and that's what I struggle with all the time about media. And I see Paula's comment that national attention hasn't done much for Flint. And, the attention helped boost news ratings in the stations that it helped highlight the need and got residents some bottled water. There have been pipes that have been upgraded and updated. But in terms of really addressing the root causes of it happening, what has it done? Because these things continue to happen again and again in communities of color, and we look at it as episodic instead of structural, and we don't look at it as racial at all.
Very true. I guess when I think about it, I do think that, because it always feels like the first step is that we have to at least acknowledge it. We have to at least talk about it. It needs to at least be on the radar. And I think sometimes there are things that happen that typically start on Black Twitter and then they make their way to the national news cycle. And sometimes things do change because of that. But I do agree, Adar, that far and wide, it's just not enough to talk about it. It's just not enough for it to be on our radar. And that if we're not doing these things that are going to bring about structural change, that are going to bring about real change, then it's just going to be on the news, and then there's no real change happening. So it's kind of like this loop that happens.
Yep, it is a loop. It is a loop.
I also think it's really important to not totally discredit the fact that news coverage does help a little bit. So while it did not solve the problem in Flint, all of us know that there's a problem in Flint and there are resources going. There need to be a lot more resources? Absolutely. Here in Baltimore, we definitely need to be holding our city officials accountable to the way that they communicate about the issue, not just we have a lot of things that they should communicate better about. But yeah, coverage and conversation is meaningful. I think it's dangerous to get in the mindset that it doesn't matter, to get it, talking about it doesn't really do much. And it's it does something, it does do something. And so speaking about it, calling attention to it, pointing out the lack of coverage, those things do make impacts. It's not, I think sometimes we want to see the changes immediately because the issues are so, they're so heinous that it's hard to imagine that people are suffering in the way that they're suffering. Not having clean water is inhumane, but these problems didn't happen overnight. And so the persistence part of being persistent and being like a squeaky nail consistently is really important. And to be mindful, wait, Flint still doesn't have water? Googling what's happening, because the cool thing about our world that we live in, where we're all attached by these devices, is that they're collecting our data. They know what we care about and what we're looking at, and they know what we're being mindful of. And so if everybody stops looking up Flint and everybody stops looking up it's gonna demonstrate in the metadata that it's not an issue anymore. And so I think, granted, that's not going to solve it, but continuing to talk about it, continuing to make sure you're seeking out information on it. I think because of the way the media is, you sometimes have to look and see what things can we support. Is there an initiative going on to rebuild the pipes in such and such and such a place? So I think that thinking that the solutions are going to be reported to us, or the initiatives are going to be reported to us, is the pitfall of having the conversation. I think having the conversations and expecting the solutions to be in the news is a little whimsical kind of thinking, but the concept that there are not people on the ground working, that just don't have the spotlight on them, I think that is where to kind of try to figure out what is being done and how can I support those people, because people aren't just sitting back and doing nothing. And I think that is the lie of media. It's yeah, we covered it and there's nothing else here to look at. And it's a whole bunch of people working on this and they don't have money, or they have a GoFundMe, or they have this small organization that's trying to put this person into power, like into a position that, and they have this really great plan, but they just don't have the political backing. Like, our political system is so dependent on money and mailers. So it sucks that that's the system that we're in, but these smaller, these more progressive candidates usually don't have the backing of the large donor base to be able to send out the mailers and to do the door knocking. And so on a local level, it's really important to try to really align yourself with folks who are trying to be progressive and have actual ideas, and not just the buzzwords. And it's a challenge. I think that is the challenging part. I think it's really easy to like who everybody likes, and it's much harder to take the time, especially with everything we have going on. I myself fell short this year of what I usually do, which is like super researching everybody and everything they had ever done who's trying to run for something. But that's the kind of persistence and dedication that's needed to make the changes that we want to see, because each individual person, I think the gag is that, oh yeah, no, your vote doesn't matter, you don't have power. And it's like, if it didn't, then the people who are getting elected wouldn't put so much money into it. So it's really important to do your due diligence and be persistent and seek out the people who are aligned with the things that in the change in the world that you want to be in.
So I love your point about social media, especially, and to me, this gets back to both the social media and independent media points that you're making, because the mainstream media news cycle is, we're going to go from one story to the next. Social media and independent media usually stay on things longer, and they do highlight those on the ground efforts, in more sustained ways than the mainstream media does. And so I think that that's really, really, positive, and why we all should be supporting those, sources. And I know that social media isn't necessarily news, but social media reports on news stories in ways that mainstream media will not. And the framing is often more, I don't want to say objective, because nothing is objective, but it provides more of a variety of framing than does corporate media. And that is really, really positive.
And you can get a lot of firsthand accounts of things that are going on. Like, I don't know anybody in Flint, but if you could probably find people in Flint who are talking about it through our social media, all of them. I'm sure there are people that you could find. You don't necessarily have to know someone directly impacted to be informed about how it is impacting individuals and communities, because so many people are sharing their life experience, their lived experiences online. And that is the beauty of social media. And it is also the ugly of social media. So I'm not saying you gotta figure out your groove with that, but yeah, I think that there is a lot of power that we are being sold a story that these things are stupid, this is a waste of time, don't do this, go read a book, and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, yeah, read a book and stuff, but there is value in hearing information from people and seeing things. And obviously you can't believe everything that you see, so you do have to vet and check and look, but yeah, anything that people spend too much time discrediting is something to just take a second look at. Like, why don't you want me to invest in this thing, invest my time and energy in this thing in this way? So that's where I'm at, and that's what I wanted to share.
Thank you, Ebony.
I wanted to lift up a lot of what Ebony was saying. Just sort of a reminder to look behind the veil that is mainstream media, that is sort of cloaking us in white supremacy, cloaking us in a certain ideology, and all the ways that Ebony was describing of ways to sort of get in those little fissures and get behind the veil. and just to keep doing that because it matters and because you'll get information and you might actually contribute to the tracking of like what people think is important and make sure that we're all working to shift what we're learning about and what remains important.
Yeah, and I have noticed that Al Jazeera is actually one of the mainstream news sites that I think is like really pretty good about reporting. That's my cat. She also agrees. And I here in Baltimore, Real News Network reports on a lot of cool stuff and like is pretty consistent and is independent and needs donors. And then there's a lot of people who have their own handle that are specifically around different movements. So whatever thing that you're passionate about, there are leaders in that space that need support through donations, through visibility, through things like that. And so just taking the time to figure out what you like and what you care about. Like you can't care about every single thing, but if you're particularly passionate about a thing, like look into how you can support more on the ground initiatives and then political candidates that are aligned with that outcome.
I completely agree with that, Ebony. I was actually going to say that's one of the things that I try to do is to follow like people who I think are really progressive and really not, there's not a lot of them in our government, but the ones, you know, who I feel like really are trying to push the envelope, I make sure to follow them on social media. You know, if they're going to go live on Instagram, I want to hear what they have to say, right? Like we're all busy, we'll have a lot going on, but that is one of the things that I do try to do. So that's just like something to keep in mind. I kind of wanted to keep going with our theme of talking about how, you know, these things are being covered by the news, but how it's being framed and kind of move the conversation on to the student loan debt and student loan forgiveness and the way it's been framed in the media. I know it feels like now that feels like old news, but, you know, it's still something that's very much affecting us. Especially those of us who have school loan debt. So I just kind of want us to now kind of jump into that and talk about the framing and the way that has kind of been also had propaganda around that and how it's been given to us by the media. Anyone want to start?
All that I would say is what I think, Adar, you should start because the thing that I have to say came from you anyway. So.
Oh, no, go. I'm curious now. What?
So we've been talking about this for a couple of weeks now. And it's so fascinating to me that when something good happens for people, that if white people benefit from it, nobody talks about white people benefiting from it, but the burden is on people of color and historically marginalized groups to be like so gracious for whatever handout that they receive, like this beggars can't be choosers kind of vibe. And it's fascinating to me because the amount, it's like 10,000 or 20,000. And when you look at people who, I don't know who has just 10,000 and 20,000, who is somebody who has like even just an undergraduate degree, there's a population. And if we isolate race in that number was developed by, it had to have been developed by somebody who does not have much debt. Like that number isn't a drop in the bucket for most people. And then when you racialize that, it's Black and brown people are not, the $20,000, thank you, but that is not eliminating debt for people. That is lessening debt for some, but it's not creating these amazing pathways that were promised to when people are campaigning and like wanting to get people's votes. And so it's just interesting to me that there is going to be a group of people that might have their debt canceled, and it's most likely going to be white people who already come from means, who maybe had taken out money for whatever. But yeah, this thing of like, we're doing you a favor, you should be grateful. It's like, we asked for cancellation. We did not ask for a drop in the bucket. And so the fact that nobody has been paying it, or I haven't, and nobody I know has been paying it since COVID, the US doesn't need it. So just cancel it. Like, we're contributing to society by being here and buying stuff and like living. So thank you, and cancel it. Like, there's no need to make it. And this idea that like Black people, you're gonna get a leg up. And it's like, if Black and brown people are getting a leg up, then somebody is like totally canceled out. Like this is a cancellation for some, and it's going to be majority white people. And then it's only a drop in the bucket for the majority of the Black and brown folks who still have debt. And I think that the way that the conversation is being framed, like I honestly would rather them say like, this $20,000 is going to eliminate debt for the white people who only had $20,000 in student loans. And that's who we are investing in. And as a nation, that's how white supremacy is upheld, by not talking about it, by not talking about like, how did that number get developed? Who decided that number? Because not even most state schools, you can't even get 4 years for $20,000. And so if somebody goes to college and they did not have any income to support that, and they took out all loans, or even just like paying for housing or whatever, that $20,000 did not cover anything. It didn't cover your educational experience. And so, and then when you add the interest of what has happened up until COVID, people who borrowed $20,000, if it was at like whatever percentage, it's way past $20,000 now, even if they just took out 20,000. So I have a lot of issue with the fact that there's no conversation about how it's going to impact white people, and it's solely focused on how it's going to be this step in the right direction for Black and brown people, and it's going to increase wealth. And it's like, who determined the number? Just seems so bogus. It's very difficult.
I agree. And another thing I was going to say, Ebony, about your point that the government doesn't need it back, is literally a percentage of what we gave out in PPP loans that are not being paid back, right? And who got those loans? Mostly
Exactly,
wealthy Americans and mostly wealthy institutions. So what is this really about? Adar, were you going to say something?
It's about Black people having their loans canceled.
Right.
So I think that one of the most recent analysis that came out, they talked about how half of Latinx student borrowers would have their debt canceled out. Mm-hmm. So if we're talking about a group that as a group will be most impacted in a positive way, it would be Latinx, right? I think that African Americans, because a lot of African Americans get Pell Grants, and that's where the 20,000 comes in, the additional 10,000 for those borrowers of Pell Grants. And I think like about 8 out of 10 people who have a Pell Grant are Black. And it is that additional money that people are all up in an uproar about too, because, free stuff, right? But nobody talks about the fact that Black women assume the largest student debt burden. Nobody talks about the fact that because of a 400-year history of stolen wealth, stolen opportunities, including economic opportunities, that white families are in more of a position in order to keep their borrowing down. And that's not to say that they don't have to borrow anything. It's not to minimize the importance of class in these conversations. It is to highlight how we got here and how we are in a situation where Black students have to take on so much debt. That is not because people can't manage their money or they didn't save or whatever. It is as a direct result of the history of legacy and Jim Crow and the ongoing circumstances that mean that, if you are a white person who is just reintegrated in the community from prison, that you are more likely to be hired than, in an entry-level job than a Black man with a college degree. I mean, we don't like to talk about those things and to talk about the economic outcomes of those things, but we can't talk about the racialization of student debt without talking about those things. And so my problem with the framing, the way that media frames it, is that they frame the outcome and just focus on the outcome. They don't talk about the root causes or how we got here, where people of color have to take on more of a debt load. The worst take I've seen on the student loan forgiveness is some media framing it as, now catch this, reparations.
What?
Yes, yes, that's the worst take that I saw on it.
Wow. That's insulting.
Very insulting. And yeah, I totally agree with you, Tammy, about white people being better able to accommodate unpaid internships. And have more access because they have more social capital than Black people do.
Mm-hmm. Tammy, do you want to add anything?
I wasn't sure if we had time. I was checking the clock and wondering if we're
Oh, you have
moving
time.
on. Or
ahead.
what struck me when I was reading about the student loans is sort of the history of it. And like when it shifted to being, when education stopped being quite so subsidized by the government, and when it switched into families should have to pay for themselves, because there was a huge influx of additional people that were able to go to school, 40, 50 years ago. So as things were shifting after the civil rights movement, and there were a lot more folks who were now entitled to get education, all of a sudden it was no longer a public good that was worth funding directly, and people had to take loans. And that's a big part of why we are where we are now, was because of that shift. Because
Right.
before that, you had, white families who were largely subsidized to go to school.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Tammy, your comment makes me think about how we literally created the middle class here in America through policy, right? Through home ownership, through college. We literally created the white middle class, right? And so then when there's an opportunity for Black people to join the middle class, all of a sudden, oh no, now we've changed it. Now college is like astronomical. So it just made me think about that.
Can I make just one last comment on this? There is a professor, his name is Professor Manuel Pastor, and he is in a university in California, and he did this study. And what he found out is that in those cities where there is an older white moneyed citizenry and a younger Black and non-Black people of color citizenry, that public spending for things like schools and education, Head Start programs goes down. And guess what spending in those cities go up? Yes. Tammy, I'm turning to you since you're a lawyer. Guess what spending
I'm thinking
goes up?
healthcare. I'm thinking
Prisons.
Prison. Yeah.
Jails.
Oh,
prisons.
of course.
Yes. And that for that to be, I mean, again, not just in one city, but that is a trend that they find across the country. What does that tell you? And yet none of this is framed in any of the conversations that we have about any of these issues. Yeah, Dana said she would guess arts. No, ma'am.
I was gonna say prison, just like our governor didn't want to invest in the red line, but he wanted to build a whole new prison,
There you go.
whole brand new prison. So at this time, I want to kind of tie things back to Queen Elizabeth in a way, and try to like maybe talk about that dichotomy in the way in which we have a new Little Mermaid. Chloe Haley will be playing her in a live action version of Little Mermaid, and I believe that the trailer came out yesterday or today, recently. And there's been a lot of hoopla on social media. I don't know that it's made it to the national news yet, but there's been a lot of commentary on the fact that we now have a Black mermaid. So I just kind of want us to kind of talk about the different way in which Queen Elizabeth and all her whiteness and glory is kind of received by mainstream media, and then the way that Chloe Haley has been received.
Haley. Just Haley. Chloe's the sister.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm showing my age here.
Haley, yes.
I'm showing my age. They're like one and the same to me. So
Yeah.
Thank you. But anyway, so now the Black mermaid in the way that she's being kind of received in American culture.
Yeah, I think people really lack imagination when it counts. I think that white supremacy is so shifty, because it's like, first of all, the Little Mermaid is not real. And I think it's interesting that people are so attached to make-believe character being a certain race. It's laughable almost, because it is laughable all the way, not almost. I'm not surprised though, because this was announced a while back when that she would be Ariel, and so now that people can actually see her in it. First of all, she hits the notes perfectly. I'm so proud. I'm very excited to go see it. The hatred and the vitriol around it is a confirmation that white supremacy is going to take a lot to kill, because it shifts so much. It just, whatever point it needs to make, it's going to make it, regardless if it makes any sense. So Little Mermaid is a fake cartoon, and they cast a beautiful Black girl who has the range to sing the parts of Little Mermaid. Even if she couldn't sing it, lots of Disney movies have like voiceovers. But anywho, it's so, it doesn't matter that it's so crazy to say in this racial space, like, it doesn't actually matter that she's Black. She could be any race representing Ariel, but this, like, I can't even wrap my head around why it is such an issue, other than the fact that she's Black. Like, it's just because she's Black and she has locks, and then they being white people can find any reason, white people who aren't into this can find any reason why this is not okay to do, that this is somehow blasphemous to, like, the Little Mermaid in history. It's the people are very serious about this thing that is so, it's just beautiful, and it doesn't need to be this.
So, I mean, one thing I thought about while you were talking is that how white supremacy is always morphing. It's, one thing I thought about is how there used to be this kind of thing that people would say, like, oh, as soon as the older white people die, racism will be over, and then everything will be great. But it's mostly young people on social media having this conversation. So that's just one of the things I was thinking about.
It is not an age thing.
Yeah.
White supremacy is not defined by age, and I think that is also the pitfall. Like, that's something people need to be mindful of, that there are, no matter what age you are, you have peers who would like to uphold white supremacy and will do it by any means necessary, and will invest lots of time and energy into ensuring that whiteness is held in this high esteem, and that anything white cannot be tarnished by Blackness. Yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, I'm curious, because you all turned me onto this earlier today. I have not been paying attention. I don't know how I haven't, because I have a daughter who's almost 9, so, like, I don't know where I've been and where she's been. But I remember thinking
about it. I think that it's a Black, like, because the criticism is Black, like, I don't think it would get to you yet, because you wouldn't be.
No, I meant even hearing about the trailer, or like even just like the movie generally.
That's what I'm saying. Like,
oh,
it's
okay.
a big deal for Black people. And I think that now that the trailer is out, I think there's a group of people, like, you wouldn't be in this space if you were a person who had a problem with it. If you understand? And so I think the only people, I think most white people who have seen it at this point have a problem with it, and, like, who are speaking. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I hear you.
Okay, sorry. But
so like a follow-up question is, or like, I noticed when I was younger watching the original animated movie, like cartoon, that like Ursula was very much like, she wore all black, and she was an octopus, and the blackness and the cloudiness and the ink and all of that. And I'm seeing on the information for this movie that Queen Latifah looks like she's playing Ursula. And I'm just very curious, and I'll go digging myself, if white people have the same issue with the bad guy being portrayed, right? Because whiteness is innocent. So if it's the character that we understand as innocent, then that's a problem when that person's no longer white. But all those other folks are fine. It's that like, for me, it's that tight connection between innocence and whiteness, and how dare you defile what I considered innocent with a figure that is not white.
And Disney has a history of racialized.
Can I read you a tweet that totally encompasses all of that, right? Here is what it says. The look of the character has changed. The look happens to be a change of race. If she was still white, but the look of the character changed with blue hair and a beard, people would comment on the difference. So you see, it's not a race issue. It's a change of character issue.
Yeah. Folks just gotta get their lives together.
Make it make sense. Make it
Right, make it make
And
sense.
it's Melissa McCarthy that is the is Ursula. It's Queen Latifah was in the play. Our audience member just put that in the chat.
So can I go back and tie this in, and especially what you said with Queen Elizabeth? Because I want to tie it in with all of the vitriol that Meghan Markle is getting.
Mhm.
And has gotten, since she married into the family, right? And how people are saying that, I mean, they did I saw on the news where the four of them did a walkabout, and people were giving all of them flowers, and apparently there were aides around that they were supposed to give the flowers to keep their arms free to receive more flowers. And an aide came up to, what's her name? And said, oh, I'll take these flowers. And she said, no, I promised, the person who gave them to me that I would personally lay them at, I don't know, whatever shrine. And so on Twitter, and in, what is it? Quora? The forum Quora?
Cool. Yeah.
Okay, Quora, thank you. Oh my goodness. People are just, I mean, you would think that she murdered someone. And they're like, well, she was nasty. She's arrogant. She said that with, I mean, just like perfectly normal, right? But the things that they put on her that they did not put on Kate Middleton. And it is just, there is nothing to it to differentiate it but race, but yet their narrative is still, no, she, what is her, Meghan Markle is just a raving narcissist who is dragging Prince Harry around by the nose, and that is their story. And so the woman can't do anything right. So to your point, Tammy, this whole thing about whiteness as innocence and whiteness as the assumed good. Yeah, and that doesn't, nobody else gets that. And that goes back to our fascination with white Disney princesses, and all of that.
Even in the animal shows, I'd say it all the time. Scar, they made Scar black. In Happy Feet, the more the group that had characteristics of like dancing and having fun, they're running around, they're collecting rocks. One of the leader has this deep voice, and he has like the plastic thing stuck around his neck is like very remnant of hypertension type of thing. And it's just like, Disney, do better. Just Disney has, I could do a whole session on all of the race aligned, non-racialized characters in Disney films. But yeah, the Ariel thing and like the protection of the pureness of whiteness, even in an imaginative, like in an imaginative story, is just it's a really good example of how white supremacy will shift and change just to uphold whatever is white.
I shared with you all earlier another thing that I saw where there was this discussion and a person was like saying real mermaids.
Yeah.
Red hair that is still red when it gets wet, and this is another reason why having this Black mermaid is so phony, because her hair got brown when it was wet, but if it had been a real mermaid, the real mermaid's hair would still have been red underwater. And it's like, what just real mermaid? What are you talking about?
Yeah, just unwell. People are unwell. Like, to make sense of it, you must be a bit unwell. Like, to form a sentence around like, if she were a real mermaid, and like the assumption that, so even like, it's so crazy to even go down this road, but like, so mermaids can only be white if they are real. in this world where mermaids are real, they're only white. Like that wouldn't even make sense. So anyway, it doesn't make sense. I'm not gonna spend too much time trying to make sense of it.
Well, another nonsensical tweet I saw was, who are all the redhead girls gonna look up to now?
Right.
And that also it's crazy to me because it's like it shows the ignorance of people, because there are Black and brown people who have red hair naturally.
Malcolm
White
X
people
had
are
red
not
hair.
Right.
people
Exactly.
red hair.
Exactly.
So even that is just like, do you know anything?
Are you
Like,
thinking about this? Exactly.
do you know things about people? I don't think so. I don't think you even know things about, you don't know things about mermaids, and you don't know things about people. Yeah.
Well, I hope that when the movie comes out, we all see it, and
I will. I'll be there. I'm gonna
conversation.
be singing along. I'm very excited.
I think that kind of concludes our discussion today. Thank you so much to panel members for meeting beforehand and discussing. And I really enjoyed the conversations we had, and the the community that was built around these discussions. And I really appreciate that time that you all put into that. And I just want to thank our audience for joining us this evening.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for all the comments that you all put into the chat and being interactive. We really appreciate that. And please spread the word that this will be on our YouTube channel if anyone, wants to, share it with others. But I think this concludes our event for this evening.
All right. Bye-bye.
Everyone, it's been fun.
It has. Thank you.
Bye.